The value of relationships is that they show us a way to evolve and to become the person we are dreaming of. And in the process, the food for our evolution comes in many forms. It could come as joy or as sorrow, and it can come through conflict, and it can come through collaboration. And in recognizing the ways that we grow and how the more we lean into grace and acceptance, the more our lessons are learned regardless of however they come to us. And as we feel the reason for something like a conflict that we're perceiving outside of us, the teaching that comes from many angles and traditions is that this is something that is needed for us to raise our energy, for us to step into an empowered version of ourselves that can handle our own inner heat and can work with that in a way where we are working with water just as much as fire, and we are able to navigate that so that we can move it through us, so that we're embodying the essence of our nature while still honoring what we feel in a way that is non-harming, in a way that, just as fire can be used to burn something or cook something, that there are places for us to express what we are experiencing in a way that lets us process it in wholeness and holding the raw weirdness of ourselves. And the practice of doing that isn't something that's necessarily taught. It's something that when you get to a certain place in life, you see that in certain circles, people have developed a higher level of self-honesty that allows them to be okay with the role that they're playing and the things that are going on in life that aren't what we are seeking in an idealistic kind of sense. And the whole universality of that, of the common bond that we share of recognizing that life on earth is different than what we may picture in an ideal, and at the same time we experience the lessons through that, and it also gives us the opportunity to let go of the attachment to the transcendental, ephemeral, phenomenal world and bridge the gap between a place of inner wealth, inner satisfaction, inner joy that is deep in all of us, and that the deeper we go, the more apparent that is, that it's not dependent on external situations. And when we bring this kind of joy or blissful awareness or enthusiasm for every experience in life, to accept with gratitude what comes to us, and to find the willingness to step into each moment with bravery. We feel a different wave of energy moving through us. And along with this comes a different set of attitudes or beliefs to be integrated into our daily experience that Martin Luther King, in paraphrasing the teachings of Jesus Christ, when St. Peter asked Jesus, "How many times should I forgive someone? 7, is that enough?" And Jesus says, 70 times 7, is that enough? And the remembrance of this from Martin Luther King being that what Jesus meant is that by repeating forgiveness 490 times for a single person or action, that it becomes a habit, it becomes a routine, it becomes something beyond that mere repetition also, that for it to be real, it's something that's felt, and that we embody forgiveness as a way of life. And by stepping into that, we are prepared to be less bothered by things, to, in the words of Don Miguel Ruiz, to not take things personally, to always do our best. Some of the 4 agreements, to, in the words of A Course in Miracles, to recognize that nothing real can threaten us, that nothing unreal exists, and herein lies the grace of God, that we have a sense of defending ourselves from imaginary threats that we've created in our mind, and in letting go of the inherent conflicts that we've created out of an illusion of thinking that something is outside of us, and feeling like we are responsible for ourselves, because we are, and even so, we become aware of the patterns that have led us to this moment of anything that we might label as good or bad, seeing through that as lenses we place on the world of judgments, and of returning ourselves to a sense of wholeness means letting go of conflict, and letting go of an inner conflicted nature which roots itself in a consciousness of separation, of I am an island, of this consciousness that feels like we are, that there is somehow an illusion of a disconnect. And in returning to wholeness, returning to unity, moving from a consciousness of duality to non-duality, or to thinking of a yin-yang symbol, of thinking only in terms of dark or only in terms of light, that when we see that not only is there darkness in the light and light in the darkness, that the contrast gives rise to the experience of either, and also that in the greater wholeness there is a deeper understanding of that which cannot be named, which is in many ways beyond human comprehension, of something of ultimate reality or truth. And that it is beautiful and deeper than words, and yet we still will come up with words like God or love or oneness or infinity, or leaving space for silence to come up with the space to allow for that which is beyond words to be experienced. And sometimes this is what it takes in order to step into that place within ourselves, to embody that taking a deep breath, remembering the depth of who you are beyond your thoughts, or beyond the body, beyond emotions, and getting to that core, that place that's always with you, and yet, like the center of a flower, can often be hidden by its petals. And so when we go to the center of our own inner nature, we see that the petals of the awareness of the body and the preoccupation with the physical world and with our duties and with the people in our lives, that all of these things are the petals of the flower, which still contain the essence of the flower. And the deeper we go into ourself, we recognize the inherent connectedness between all of these temporary, transcendent aspects of our experience and the eternal changelessness of our deepest self, of our inner nectar. And the Sanskrit word amrita, divine nectar, or ananda, divine bliss, that this remembrance of something that is beyond comprehension through the senses, and yet still belongs to each one of us. By coming into this place, we're ecstatically united together beyond time and space. And this place, which is center everywhere, circumference nowhere, always all around us, that the spark of the universe, which proceeded from the Big Bang, smaller than the smallest atom, and now expanded across the infinity of time and space, resides within the heart of every one of us and in every one of our cells. That releasing the identity of guilt and shame and condemnation, judgment and fear, even though these may arise in a temporary state, and even though there may be long-standing patterns either in our life through the way that we've been taught and conditioned, or even genetically through generations, millennia of conditioning, that we are in a unique space in time to be receiving a lesson of letting go of what does not serve us. And this is the truth that will set you free. Receiving your wholeness, receiving your innocence, letting yourself be free, recognizing where you have imprisoned yourself and how you can take off your own chains, and how in the grand scheme of things, it is much easier to let someone who has already freed themselves help you become free, and how this is a process that we're all in together. Returning to forgiveness. Oftentimes, in order to forgive others, we must forgive ourselves. And in setting aside all of this, we return to life with joy. We see whatever states that we've been holding ourselves in as mere illusions, and we return to that childlike wonder and happiness, and we receive the fullness of life without pretense. And that doesn't mean that we are perfect as humans, and yet we still recognize that perfection which is in everyone and everything. The paradox of what we see and experience as a tangible reality, or as an experience of what we envision for life, and the recognition of the perfection in every moment of it being exactly what it needs to be. These lessons come to us when we're ready. We don't need to rush the process. We don't need to feel like taking it on the accelerator route if that's not for us. And we also don't need to feel like we have to go at anyone else's pace, that these lessons are yours to receive in the time that's right for you, in the way that's right for you, to find that space within yourself, to be able to hold pain as a sign, as a message, as a symbol for change in the right direction, and being able to work with what's going on in life with grace, with gratitude, because as our perception changes, as our perspective changes, the world responds in kind. I recently heard that a simple way of describing this is when there are grooves or superhighways in one direction and we want to change that direction, then we feel like we're moving tons and tons and tons of energy or thoughts, or changing this or that. And it may feel like that at first in terms of stepping off the superhighway of the conditioned past and stepping into a new reality where you're bushwhacking through the wilderness with a machete, finding your way, and seeing, having trust, having faith when the sky is dark and you're not sure. You can look within yourself and find that universal point of connection, that there is light within you, that you are light, that you are this energy beaming and burning bright. And that's a holy fire within you. And when you don't try to squash it or set it aside, when you work with it and you let it be what it needs to be, you allow it to take shape and to flow, to change, to be what it is. This is you. This is you beyond your body, your thoughts, your experience as a person with an identity being in the world. And still, the question remains, Who am I? Who am I not? Where do I begin? And what is this sense of self that I am relying on to navigate the world in the context of this greater concept of I? And as often it feels like we're fitting ourselves into boxes or roles that don't completely define anything about us other than the words that we use or some of the feelings that we feel. And yet we continue because turning inside out of ourselves, of bringing out what is inside of us out into the world, is how that transformation happens and how we become free in the process. Stepping into service out of self-involvement becomes a daily practice and a way to see how to remove the ongoing misery that is a self-created cycle procedurally generated as business as usual until we recognize that that's what's happening. And in letting go of that, there's still a process. It doesn't all happen all at once. And so rather than taking it too seriously, we enjoy the process and we share the process. And we don't need to be anything that we're not in the process. And asking ourselves, who am I? And approaching all of life with a curiosity lets us let go of that sense of judgment and move into a space of love without it feeling overly sappy or touchy-feely or extra spiritual or anything, where we are simply asking questions about who we are, or about what life is, or about what it isn't. And what are we doing here? And where are we going? Where did we come from? We're somewhere at the outer edge of the Milky Way. How did we get here? How did we get in bodies? How do I communicate with you? And how do you expect to remember any of this? To apply it into your life? Or even have some semblance of this being a communication that you receive? And the mystery of life lets us have fun with this and make it something that's pretty serious, but not too serious. And it lets us be ourselves in a way that we haven't let ourselves be, or that we're allowing ourselves to be ourselves more in a way that expands our sense of self. And in spiritual circles or psychological circles, there is often a definition between the small self and the big self, the small s and the big S, that the ego and the superego, or the soul, that we are all united in, that the big self is our connection point to everybody else. And we all experience and share in that. That's the higher self, which lives within us, which is connected to the highest source of reality and is present behind the small self as the witness as the awareness without form, looking at thoughts. Is that a thought? Am I thinking a thought? Where did that thought come from? Is that thought me? Are any thoughts you? And the thinker of thoughts and the observer of thoughts. We might say the small self is the thinker and the big self is the observer. And the big self still learns a lot from observing the little self. This is a fascinating experience. Going into something like a practice of self-study or coaching, self-inquiry or meditation, we can start to bring about a change within ourselves that expands into our interactions, and then it just becomes something we're aware of that's coming from our nature and yet feels old and new at the same time. So we'll let that be and live in the present with that awareness.